For more than a decade, I was the quiet force behind Calibre Technologies' rise in the fiercely competitive tech landscape of Silicon Valley. My name is Ethan Carter, and while most outside the company knew only one face, the one flashing in the headlines and leading glossy keynote presentations, inside, I was the one who made sure those moments happened. I was the guy who turned abstract ideas into actionable plans, the one who stayed late at the office perfecting proposals and patching software glitches, and the one who wrestled with impossible deadlines to land multi-million-dollar deals that kept our company afloat and thriving. When I started as a junior project manager, fresh out of college and full of hope, I never imagined I'd be overshadowed by a CEO who thrived on taking credit for others' hard work. Mark Donovan was charismatic, a born salesman with a booming voice and a magnetic presence. The board adored him. The media loved his sound bites, and the shareholders saw him as the visionary leader propelling Calibre into the future. Meanwhile, I was the guy everyone called the fixer, quiet, reliable, and effective. I liked that role. It suited me to be the silent partner in success as long as my contributions were respected. And for a while, they were. My early projects gained traction, and my supervisors praised my initiative. I led a team that developed an innovative AI-driven analytics tool that increased client retention by 25%. I played a key role in the Westridge Hotel redevelopment proposal, a complex $45 million project that required juggling city regulations, architectural firms, and financial backers. My negotiation skills saved the company nearly $300,000 in projected costs, a figure that was quietly celebrated within the project team. But slowly, the dynamics began to shift. Mark started inserting himself into my presentations, taking over discussions at meetings I had meticulously prepared for. Emails I sent detailing project milestones were redirected to him, who would then reply with "Great work, team," without ever mentioning me. I watched as our internal newsletters featured CEO insights that were clearly based on ideas I'd shared weeks earlier with my department. When the company won the prestigious Innovator of the Year award, Mark accepted the trophy on stage. I wasn't even invited. At first, I told myself it was just how corporate politics worked. Someone had to be the face, the figurehead. But it hurt. I felt invisible. It stung even more because Mark would occasionally drop a "good job, Ethan" in private, as if to remind me I was supposed to be grateful for the scraps of recognition. One year, during a particularly grueling project rollout, I worked 80-hour weeks coordinating with 5 different teams across 3 time zones. I was exhausted, but proud. At the project's successful launch party, Mark gave a speech where he described the visionary leadership that had made the success possible. No mention of the months my team and I had poured into the project. No nod to the late nights or the crises averted. I started to document these incidents, saving emails and memos, trying to build a record. I confided in a few trusted colleagues who quietly nodded and shared similar frustrations. It was a pattern. Mark Donovan was a master at rewriting history to fit his narrative. Then came the blindsiding moment. One ordinary Tuesday morning, I opened my inbox and found an email from HR titled "Termination of Employment." No prior warnings, no mention of performance issues, just a cold, bureaucratic message stating my position had been terminated effective immediately. I sat frozen, staring at the screen, the reality sinking in like a punch to the gut. The world I'd dedicated over a decade to was crumbling in an instant, and I had no idea why. My phone calls to HR went unanswered. I reached out to my manager, only to be told the leadership team had made a unanimous decision. When I tried to get an explanation from Mark himself, I was ignored. That day, the weight of betrayal pressed down harder than any failure ever could. I was forced out without cause, my reputation smeared subtly through whispered rumors of performance issues and incompatibility with company culture, all complete fabrications. It was clear to me now, Mark Donovan had used me for years, benefiting from my work and loyalty, and once I was no longer useful, discarded me like an old tool. But even in the depths of that despair, I felt a spark of resolve ignite. This wasn't the end of my story. I wasn't going to let my years of dedication and success be erased or stolen without a fight. Somewhere in the shadows of that corporate maze were the proofs of my authorship, the project files, the emails, the strategic plans. I began to comb through everything I had saved on my work computer and personal backups. The early drafts, the brainstorming notes, the email chains where I'd explained concepts and deadlines to the team. Slowly, the evidence came into focus. Despite feeling betrayed, I knew I had to approach this with cold, hard facts. I owed that to myself and to every colleague who had quietly supported me. The road ahead was uncertain and fraught with risk, but I was ready. Ready to reclaim the truth, ready to expose the man who had profited from my silence, ready to rebuild my career on my own terms. So there I was, after years of silent success, blindsided by sudden dismissal, but fueled by a quiet, burning determination to fight back. Mark Donovan may have controlled the narrative until now, but I was about to show the world what really happened behind the scenes at Caliber Technologies. After the initial shock of being dismissed, I couldn't help but replay every moment I'd spent at Calibre under Mark Donovan's leadership. And one thing became painfully obvious. This wasn't a one-off betrayal. Mark had, for years, operated a pattern of systematically stealing credit from me, and likely others, while positioning himself as the sole genius behind the company's successes. Looking back, it was almost surgical in its precision. Mark had a way of inserting himself into projects at just the right time, often late enough so that all the groundwork was done, but early enough that he could take credit for the final push. Time and again, I saw the ideas, innovations, and strategies I had conceived being rebranded under his name, with my role erased from official records and company communications. One of the earliest and most glaring examples was during the development of the Caliber Cloud Suite update, which was supposed to redefine our flagship product's market position. I'd led a team of engineers and strategists who worked tirelessly for over 6 months, researching, prototyping, and building a roadmap for this update. Countless late nights and weekends went into that project. I remember meticulously crafting a presentation deck for the board, carefully aligning the product's features with market demands and future trends. But when the quarterly results presentation came around, Mark stood at the podium, a confident smile on his face, and talked about his vision for the company's future. He outlined the Cloud Suite update as though it was a concept born in his office. The narrative was clear. This was his triumph. I sat in the audience, jaw clenched, as my colleagues applauded his speech. The presentation deck I had crafted was used word for word, yet my name was nowhere to be found. Behind closed doors, I found out the story was even worse. It wasn't just about public presentations. Internal company documents, including status reports and project updates, were quietly altered. My name was systematically removed from version histories and replaced with marks or generic titles like senior management. Even emails I'd sent to stakeholders acknowledging milestones were ignored or forwarded without attribution, leaving me invisible in official communications. This was no accident. I discovered that Mark's personal assistant had been instructed to review all outgoing communications and scrub mentions of me from any documents he presented to the board or external partners. The assistant, bound by loyalty and contract, was careful not to betray these orders, but confided in me months later, after my dismissal, how often she was asked to clean up my involvement. The manipulation extended beyond paper trails. I learned from several colleagues that Mark had been quietly reassigning projects originally under my management directly to his office. One senior project manager told me he saw Mark commandeering files and taking control over initiatives I had been spearheading, effectively cutting me out of the loop. Then Mark would present these projects at client meetings and industry conferences as his own work. It was a carefully choreographed act of erasure. Awards ceremonies were another stage where Mark's appropriation played out. On multiple occasions, innovations I had developed, such as an algorithm that improved data processing speeds and a client retention strategy that boosted revenues, were officially credited to Mark during company-wide events and press releases. Colleagues who raised concerns were subtly warned or sidelined. It became clear to me that Mark's public image as a visionary leader was meticulously crafted on a foundation built by others' efforts. This ongoing betrayal came with real consequences. Over time, my influence within the company diminished. Junior employees who had once sought my mentorship began to gravitate toward Mark's office, believing him to be the source of all innovation. Middle managers hesitated to align with me, worried that supporting someone out of favor with the CEO could jeopardize their careers. The camaraderie and respect I once enjoyed were replaced by quiet exclusion and professional isolation. Perhaps the most insidious aspect was how this pattern affected my own confidence and sense of belonging. I started questioning whether I was imagining things or if I simply wasn't cut out for corporate politics. Mark's charisma and authoritative presence made it difficult to confront the truth openly. After all, he was the CEO, the public face of Caliber's success. Who would believe that such a respected leader was orchestrating this kind of deception? But the more I observed, the clearer the pattern became. Mark Donovan's relentless credit stealing was no haphazard mistake. It was a deliberate, strategic practice designed to consolidate power and protect his reputation at all costs. He controlled the narrative inside Caliber, making sure the spotlight always shone on him, regardless of whose hard work actually fueled the company's growth. Realizing this fueled a deep resolve within me. If I was going down, I wasn't going to go quietly. I started collecting everything that could expose this pattern. Email chains where Mark casually acknowledged my ideas, but later took credit. Time-stamped project files showing my original drafts. Internal memos referencing my contributions, and even testimonials from colleagues who witnessed these injustices. I knew that if I wanted to reclaim my career and integrity, I needed proof, and I needed to be meticulous. This was the first step in what would be a long, grueling battle, not just for myself, but to finally expose a toxic leadership style that had robbed many of their rightful achievements. The days following my unexpected dismissal were some of the darkest I'd faced in my entire career. I went from waking up every morning eager to tackle challenges to staring blankly at the ceiling, trying to make sense of how everything had spiraled out of control. The questions haunted me. Why? What had I done wrong? Was there something I'd missed? But gradually, a stubborn part of me refused to accept that it was just bad luck or a misguided decision. Something felt off, like I'd been thrown under the bus for reasons far beyond the surface. And with every passing hour, that suspicion gnawed deeper. So, I did what I'd always done best. I started digging. I began by revisiting my personal archive, files, and emails I had meticulously saved over the years. I knew Caliber's network security inside and out. And while I had limited access now, the backups on my external drives contained everything: project outlines, client feedback, technical documentation, even internal memos that painted a fuller picture of what had happened in those glass-walled conference rooms where the real power plays unfolded. As I sifted through these digital remnants, something peculiar caught my eye. Deep inside a folder labeled Strategic Partners was a subfolder named EnduraTech. The name was familiar. It was the rival company that had dogged us for years, always lurking in the background, snapping up clients, and pushing for dominance in the tech space. But this was no mere coincidence. Why would files related to them be on Caliber's internal server? Curiosity morphed quickly into alarm as I opened the folder. What I found inside was like stepping into a nightmare. There were detailed design documents for projects I had spearheaded, everything from blueprint-level schematics to marketing strategies. Even more shocking were the email threads between Mark Donovan and senior executives at EnduraTech. The correspondence was candid and chilling. Mark was trading company secrets, confidential plans, and proprietary technology for personal gain. One email stood out. Mark outlined a timeline for handing over crucial project files, promising exclusive early access in exchange for appropriate compensation. The cold calculation behind the words hit me like a punch. This wasn't just business as usual. This was outright betrayal. I scoured the emails for any hint of resistance or remorse, but found none. Mark appeared to be orchestrating a full-scale corporate espionage scheme from the inside. My stomach churned as I realized this explained the inexplicable roadblocks our projects had faced recently, the sudden cancellations, the unexplained delays. These weren't failures of management or market forces. They were deliberate acts of sabotage. I felt a wave of anger and disbelief crash over me. For years, I had dedicated myself to building Caliber's reputation, to pushing innovation forward, to closing deals that sustained hundreds of jobs. And here was Mark Donovan, the man at the helm, quietly dismantling everything I had worked for. selling it piece by piece to our fiercest competitor. The more I dug, the clearer the picture became. ID logs showed Mark accessing restricted servers at odd hours, erasing audit trails, and manipulating files. Financial documents pointed to offshore transactions linked to accounts in Mark's name, funneling large sums in exchange for stolen data. It was a full-fledged conspiracy. Realizing the gravity of what I had uncovered, I knew this wasn't something I could handle alone. I reached out discreetly to a handful of trusted colleagues, people whose judgment I respected, and who had quietly voiced their own concerns about Mark's increasingly erratic behavior. They listened, shocked but unsurprised, and pledged their support. Together, we began compiling a timeline of Mark's treachery, mapping out every suspicious move, every canceled contract, every subtle shift in company policy that aligned with his secret dealings. It became painfully clear that Mark's greed had blinders on. He cared nothing for the fallout, for the ruined careers, or the compromised integrity of the company. To him, it was all a transaction. As I locked the files onto a new encrypted hard drive, I felt the weight of responsibility settle over me. This was no longer just about reclaiming my career or my reputation. This was about saving Calibre from a CEO who had turned his back on everything it stood for. I knew the road ahead would be long, fraught with risk, and possibly dangerous. But I had the truth, and that truth was my weapon. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment with the glow of the laptop screen reflecting off the walls, a fierce resolve took root inside me. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for every employee, every partner, every client who had ever trusted Calibre. And I would not rest until Mark Donovan was held accountable, no matter what it took. After discovering the full extent of Mark Donovan's deceit and having been unceremoniously dismissed, I believed that once I presented the truth, my colleagues and the company leadership would rally around me. I thought that justice would prevail and that the real villain would be exposed. But what followed was something far darker and more insidious than I ever imagined. A relentless campaign to discredit, isolate, and destroy me personally and professionally. The moment the news of my dismissal went public inside Calibre, the atmosphere shifted overnight. The subtle warmth and respect I had earned over a decade turned into cold stares, whispered conversations that abruptly ceased when I entered a room, and an unspoken yet palpable wall of exclusion. I wasn't just out of a job, I was being erased. Within days, my inbox filled with chilling emails from the company's human resources and legal departments. These weren't mere formalities. They were calculated, vicious accusations alleging that I had engaged in insubordination, violations of company policy, and even breaches of confidentiality. The language was vague enough to seem plausible, but lacked any concrete evidence or examples. It was clear these allegations were fabricated tools designed to tarnish my reputation and justify my firing. It was devastating to see my spotless record suddenly smeared with such damaging claims. For years, I had been one of the most trusted project managers in the firm. Yet, here I was, branded as a disruptive, untrustworthy employee overnight. The emotional toll was overwhelming. What hurt the most wasn't the accusations themselves, but the sudden and painful shift in how my colleagues treated me. People who had once been friends and allies now avoided me like I carried a contagious disease. They stopped returning calls, declined to collaborate, and even crossed the hall to avoid being seen speaking to me. It wasn't just professional distancing, it was complete social ostracization. I later found out that Mark had personally led the smear campaign behind closed doors. He held meetings with senior executives and department heads, painting me as a disgruntled employee bitter over not being promoted and implying I was acting out of jealousy and spite. He framed me as someone who was actively trying to undermine the company from within, suggesting that my attempts to expose him were nothing more than a personal vendetta. It was infuriating to realize how well he spun his web. He had built a narrative so compelling that even some of my longtime colleagues began to question my motives. Mark was a master manipulator, using fear and loyalty to silence dissent. He portrayed the company as a unified family, and me as the disruptive outsider. The impact of his machinations became clearer when the company announced a leadership restructuring just weeks after my firing. Key positions were reshuffled, and loyalists were placed in strategic roles to consolidate Mark's control. The restructuring was framed as a positive, forward-looking move, But in reality, it was a purge that further isolated me and tightened Mark's grip. This corporate realignment didn't just sideline me, it erased my contributions. Projects I had nurtured from inception were reassigned to others, often without acknowledgement of my involvement. Reports, presentations, and even internal newsletters were edited to remove any mention of my name. It was as if I had never existed within the company's walls. As my professional network within Calibre crumbled, so did my opportunities. Invitations to industry conferences, speaking engagements, and client meetings stopped. Potential collaborations dried up. The isolation was suffocating, and the void where my career once flourished felt bleak and endless. Despite the personal and professional devastation, what hurt most was the betrayal by people I once trusted. I had spent years mentoring younger staff, championing teamwork, and driving innovation. Now, those efforts were disregarded, and my integrity was questioned. Yet, amidst the darkness, a flicker of resolve began to grow. I refused to let fabricated accusations and manufactured isolation be the final chapter of my story. If Mark thought that silencing me was the endgame, he underestimated my determination. I started to quietly reach out to former clients and trusted allies outside the company, gathering testimonials and documentation that could refute the false narrative. Late nights were spent organizing emails, project files, and witness statements, creating a meticulous archive to support my case. I knew this fight would be long and difficult, but my reputation and my future depended on it. Betrayal had cut me deeply, but false accusations and isolation were poison, slow, insidious, and almost unbearable. Yet they also fueled a fire within me. I would not be defined by Mark's lies or the fear he instilled in those around me. This was no longer just about reclaiming a job. It was about reclaiming my name, my dignity, and justice. Looking back, I realized that the real battle wasn't just against Mark Donovan. It was against a culture that enabled such deceit and silenced truth. But even in that, I found strength. Because sometimes, it's in the darkest moments that we discover the brightest parts of ourselves. After being blindsided by my abrupt dismissal and the wave of lies orchestrated by Mark Donovan, I knew I had to act fast, but carefully. The stakes were enormous. It wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. It was about salvaging a decade's worth of hard work, passion, and innovation that had been stolen, hidden, and distorted. I wasn't just fighting for my career. I was fighting for justice, for truth, and to ensure that what happened to me wouldn't happen to someone else down the line. The first step was to take stock of every piece of evidence I had. Years of meticulous work had left a digital footprint scattered across countless emails, project files, design documents, meeting notes, and internal reports. What initially looked like a mountain of disconnected files quickly revealed a clear chronological story of my involvement in every major initiative Mark claimed as his own. I began the painstaking process of gathering, sorting, and verifying these documents, starting with the digital archives stored on my personal devices and backed up to the cloud. For nights on end, I sat in my home office, the only place that still felt like mine, with my laptop, external hard drives, and printed documents spread out like pieces of a puzzle. I cross-referenced timestamps to prove that critical designs and project proposals predated any of Mark's supposed original ideas. Every saved email chain, every version of a presentation, and every internal memo that mentioned my name or ideas became a weapon in my arsenal. One of the most powerful pieces of evidence was the metadata embedded in the project files. Digital fingerprints that technology makes almost impossible to forge. These timestamps told a story Mark couldn't deny. I was the original author of the concepts, the strategic thinker behind the groundbreaking product features, the driver of the client presentations that won millions in contracts. And I had the data to prove it, but cold, hard files weren't enough. I needed human voices, people who had seen my work firsthand and could vouch for my contributions. I carefully reached out to former clients, partners, and colleagues who had worked with me over the years. Some were reluctant, understandably cautious about getting involved in what could become a corporate war. Others were immediately supportive, horrified at the injustice I'd faced. One client, a senior executive at a Fortune 500 company, even sent a written statement recalling how I had personally led their project to success and how Mark had later tried to rewrite history. Reconnecting with my former teammates was equally important. Many had been pressured by Mark or company politics to stay silent, but when I approached them with evidence and a clear purpose, several stepped forward. They shared emails, meeting notes, and personal accounts that exposed Mark's long-standing pattern of credit appropriation and exclusion. Their courage was inspiring. These were people risking their own careers to help right a wrong. While assembling my evidence, I also sought legal counsel. Finding the right attorney was a challenge in itself. I needed someone who not only understood employment law, but also had experience dealing with corporate fraud and intellectual property disputes. After several consultations, I hired a seasoned lawyer whose expertise gave me hope and a clearer picture of the complex path ahead. Together, we reviewed every piece of evidence, identifying the strongest claims and preparing a comprehensive formal complaint for the company's board of directors. The legal process was daunting. Corporate bylaws, confidentiality agreements, internal investigation protocols, every detail mattered. I spent hours learning about the procedures that would govern how my complaint would be handled, what kind of protections I could expect, and the risks I faced, the fear of retaliation, potential blacklisting in the industry, and the emotional toll of reliving the betrayal weighed heavily on me. But my resolve never wavered. Throughout this process, the personal cost became apparent. My family noticed the late nights, the stress, and the moments when frustration nearly broke through my calm exterior. My wife, always my rock, reminded me why this fight mattered, not just for me, but for the integrity of the business world I believed in. Our conversations grounded me, reminding me that success isn't just about titles or money, but about being true to who you are. At the same time, a tempting opportunity emerged, a senior leadership role at a smaller but promising startup. The offer came as a breath of fresh air after the toxic environment I'd left behind, promising a chance to rebuild without the shadows of past betrayals. But I hesitated. Accepting might mean walking away from the fight that could set a precedent for fairness and transparency, a fight that had grown bigger than me. Every night in that quiet office surrounded by evidence, I weighed my options. Could I endure a long legal battle? Was it worth risking my career on exposing a powerful CEO? The answer came clear. I wasn't just reclaiming my career. I was standing up for every overlooked employee, every stolen idea, every silenced voice. This fight was mine, but its impact could be far-reaching. And so, with a mix of exhaustion and fierce determination, I began the formal process, drafting complaints, submitting evidence, and preparing for what I knew would be a difficult but necessary confrontation. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was sure. I was no longer a victim. I was a man ready to take back his story, and this time, no one was going to steal my voice. The morning of the board meeting was charged with a strange mix of anticipation and anxiety that settled deep in my chest as I stepped into the corporate headquarters. I had spent countless hours preparing for this moment, yet nothing could fully calm the storm of emotions inside me. Anger, frustration, hope, and determination, all tangled together. This meeting was more than just a chance to reclaim my career. It was the moment to expose years of deception and wrongdoing by someone who had wielded power to crush those beneath him. The boardroom was intimidating. A long, polished mahogany table stretched across the room, surrounded by stern-faced board members, company lawyers, and a handful of senior executives. Mark Donovan sat at one end, the usual confident, self-assured expression replaced by a tension I hadn't seen before. Across the table from him, I set up my laptop, hooked up the projector, and laid out the neatly organized folders and documents I'd brought. I wasn't here to beg for justice. I was here to prove it. I began my presentation with a detailed timeline of the projects I had spearheaded over the past decade. I walked the room through my role in everything from initial concept development to final client presentations. Layer by layer, I peeled back the carefully constructed narrative Mark had presented over the years, showing email threads, memos, and drafts that bore my name and unmistakable fingerprints of my work. It was like watching a story unfold in real time. The story of a man who stole my efforts and paraded them as his own. Each piece of evidence was painstakingly detailed. I displayed metadata from design files and project documents, proving creation dates far earlier than anything Mark could claim credit for. I shared email exchanges where Mark privately acknowledged my contributions, but then publicly undermined and erased my involvement. Client testimonials recounted their direct interactions with me, praising my expertise and leadership. Colleagues testified to my role as the true driving force behind several high-profile initiatives. The atmosphere in the room shifted palpably as I revealed the forensic IT report commissioned by my legal team. This was the smoking gun, detailed logs showing unauthorized access to my personal work files from Mark's account, document versions mysteriously altered, and timestamps manipulated to make it appear as though Mark was the original author. The board members leaned in, eyes scanning the technical reports that laid bare the extent of Mark's subterfuge. For the first time, Mark looked visibly shaken. His usual smooth, rehearsed responses faltered when confronted with hard evidence. When given the floor to respond, he launched into denials and blame-shifting, accusing me of overstepping my role, attempting to sabotage the company, and exaggerating my contributions. But his words rang hollow against the mountain of proof before them. Board members exchanged looks, some skeptical at first, but increasingly troubled as the depth of the misconduct became undeniable. Questions came fast and sharp, probing into how this had gone unnoticed for so long, why internal audits hadn't caught the irregularities, and the potential fallout with partners and clients. I answered each with transparency and calm, refusing to be baited into emotional reactions, emphasizing my commitment to the company's success and integrity. The conversation soon turned to the real consequences of Mark's actions. His deception had not only stolen credit and opportunity from me, but had put the company at risk of losing crucial business. The multi-million-dollar partnership with Enduratech was now endangered because of the breach in confidentiality and falsification of project ownership. The reputation of the company was on the line, and the board was keenly aware that they needed to act decisively. After hours of intense discussion behind closed doors, the board reconvened with their verdict. The decision was swift and unanimous. Mark Donovan's position as CEO was untenable. They demanded his immediate resignation, citing breach of trust, ethical violations, and damage to the company's standing. Mark's protests were met with firm resolve. The company had to rebuild its integrity, and he could no longer lead that effort. Leaving that boardroom, I felt a profound mix of relief, vindication, and responsibility. The battle for truth was won, but the real work had just begun. I had to lead not just projects, but the cultural change needed to prevent this kind of betrayal from ever happening again. The board assured me they would implement new policies to protect employee contributions, increase transparency, and hold leadership accountable. Mark Donovan's fall sent ripples through the industry. Shareholders, clients, and competitors watched closely as the company embarked on a new chapter. I was offered the role of Chief Operating Officer with a mandate to oversee not only operations, but ethics and culture reform. The company's reputation was bruised but salvageable, and I was determined to guide it toward renewed trust and innovation. That day was a turning point. I had faced the most powerful man in the room and exposed a web of deceit. It wasn't just about reclaiming what was mine. It was about ensuring the future of every employee who would come after me. The fight for justice had changed me, but more importantly, it had given me a chance to lead with integrity and vision. The day I stood before the crowd as the newly appointed Chief Operating Officer felt surreal, a moment that marked not just personal vindication, but a profound turning point for the entire company. After the storm of betrayal, deceit, and corporate sabotage, I was finally in a position to rebuild what had been broken. Not just my reputation, but the very culture and integrity of the firm. The board meeting that led to Mark Donovan's ousting had sent shockwaves through the company, but it also opened the door for honest reflection and decisive action. From the moment I was reinstated, it was clear that this was more than just a fresh start for me personally. It was a mandate to ensure transparency, fairness, and respect for every employee's contributions. The message from the top was loud and clear. No more credit theft. No more silencing of the people who actually do the work. I immediately set to work with a dedicated team to overhaul our company's internal policies. We implemented strict protocols around project documentation and attribution. Every idea, every design, every strategic plan would be traceable back to its true origin. We introduced a new system for anonymous reporting of ethical concerns, ensuring that employees could safely raise issues without fear of retaliation. The company culture needed to change from the ground up, and it was my responsibility to lead that transformation. One of the most gratifying moments came when we held a company-wide town hall meeting. Employees who had once felt sidelined, ignored, or even punished for speaking up began to share their stories. There was a collective sense of healing and renewed trust. It was clear that the shadow cast by one man's greed had deeply affected many, but the future was bright with the promise of fairness and accountability. Externally, the collapse of the fraudulent deal with Enduratech was a clear sign that justice was not just internal, but also public. The competitor had been poised to gain from Donovan's unethical dealings, but once the truth came to light, their partnership fell apart. This restored our clients' confidence and showed the industry that integrity would always triumph over deceit. Personally, stepping into the leadership role came with its challenges. There was pressure to prove that the company could move forward and succeed without the toxic influence of the past. But every project I led, every new partnership forged, was a testament to resilience and ethical leadership. My team and I prioritized collaboration, transparency, and innovation, the core values that had been missing under Donovan's tenure. Looking back, it's hard to believe how close I came to losing everything I worked for. But those dark days forged a stronger version of myself, one who understood the cost of silence and the power of standing up for what's right. My story became more than just about one man's betrayal. It was about the importance of perseverance, courage, and leadership rooted in honesty. The company I now help steer was a better place, one where ideas were credited properly, achievements celebrated collectively, and integrity was the foundation of every decision. As I looked out at my team, I saw not just employees, but partners in a mission to do business differently, better, and with heart. And for Mark Donovan, the fall from grace was swift and permanent. His reputation shattered, doors closed, and he became a cautionary tale about the consequences of deception and greed. Meanwhile, my journey was far from over, but the foundation was solid, built on truth, justice, and the unwavering belief that the right thing always wins.